Hello, and welcome to part 3 of How to Adapt a Toy, Making a Switch Port. My name is Kate Mosley, and I'm an AT specialist. I am a task employee that contracts with STAR to provide AT webinars and trainings. You can view these trainings at www.startraining.org. This PowerPoint will be available upon request. Please email me at tasc@ucphuntsville.org for more information on this module, or if you have any questions about this video or any of the other videos in this module. So just a quick bit about TASC and STAR. TASC stands for Technology Assistance for Special Consumers. We do AT consultations, informal sessions, and technical assistance. STAR is Alabama's assistive technology resource. Together, TASC and STAR partner to bring you al.atforall.com. atforall.com is a lending library where you can check out any of the equipment listed for 2 to 3 weeks. This equipment includes switches, mounts, adaptive toys, communication aids, aids to daily living, computer access tools, and more. So an overview about this video, we are going to talk about alternatives to making a switch port, what tools you will need to make a switch port, and then I will demo how to make one as well as show you the basic steps. This is part 3 in the 4-part video series of how to adapt a toy. So what exactly is a port? There are 2 kinds of ports. There are female and male ports. Switches will have a male port, as you can see in the bottom left. You will need to create a female port so that we can connect the switch to the adaptive toy. You can actually buy your own female port. If you make multiple toys, this can be expensive, but if you do choose to buy your own port, you will buy a cord similar to the one shown at the right. You can see that it has both a male and female end, but for the purpose of adapting toys, we will only need the female end. To get access to this end, we're going to cut the cord in half and strip the part of the wire, and your cord is ready to go. If you do choose to buy your own cord, you will not need double-stranded wire or a 3.5mm female stereo jack. If you do buy your own cord, you can skip part 3 of this training and move on to video 4. Now let's review our toolbox. Here are the tools you will need for soldering. You will need a soldering iron, like the one shown here with the yellow handle, flux, which is this gel here that comes in a little tin, solder, which is shown in these 2 images, either wrapped around in a coil or in this tight little package, and then you will need a soldering iron stand, like the 2 shown at the right. You will also need wire strippers, like the ones up here, double-stranded wire, which is shown in this image to the far right. Here are 2 different types of double-stranded wire. There's one with a clear coating and one with the red and black. I personally recommend the wire that comes in red and black so you can keep track of what wire is going where. You'll notice that there are many smaller wire within the plastic coating, but there are 2 distinct plastic coatings. We will also need a 3.5mm female stereo jack like the one shown here. To buy just this piece in bulk, you can go to digikey.com. That's digikey.com to buy these in bulk, as opposed to buying the stereo jack that we had mentioned earlier. You will need wire cutters, scissors, and paper towels. So now let's review the steps you will need to know to create your own port. First, we're going to set up our station. We want to make sure that there's not a lot of things around our station that could be burned or melted by our soldering iron. We also want to make sure that we're not wearing loose clothing and that our hair is tied back. Next, we're going to set up our wire. We're going to strip our wire and make sure that we've exposed the metal part of the wire within the casing. Then let's plug in our iron. We want to make sure that our iron's hot so that it can effectively melt the solder. Next, we will unscrew the plastic cover from our switch port. We are going to string the wire through the switch port as I'll demonstrate, then solder and trim the wire. We'll do that 2 times with the first and the second wire, and then we will reapply the plastic cover onto our switch port. It's important to remember that for the wires to work with both output and input, which we need to work the switch, we don't want to have any metal touching. So solder and wires create a link between two metal parts. So to have input and output, which are two separate signals, we don't want to cross wires or have any metal touching. So we have 2 points in which we'll attach wires. One will be at the green circle, which is seen here, or when we flip the switch part over, it will kind of fall without, not in line. And then we have the blue circle, which is right here at the very end of the switch part. So we will have one wire, let's just say the red tubing wire, at the green circle and the black at the blue circle. We want to make sure that our solder is not touching the body of the port, but it's just on the area that we're trying to keep the connection between the wire and the solder together. Same for this. We don't want any of the solder or the wire to touch the upper parts. So my double-stranded wire comes with a red and a black casing. There's going to be multiple wires in the red tube and multiple wires in the black tube. We're going to make sure that we solder those wires together. And then for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to say that the red string wire is going to go at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my red wire and string it through the hole towards the top of the switch port as seen in this little graphic. I'm then going to place a little dab of flux over the wire and let the solder replace the flux. So it's going to look something like this. We're going to have our solder covered wire and then a little solder bubble that's going to hold the wire in place. Next, we're going to cut the wire as close to our solder bubble as possible. Now we're going to repeat this step at the bottom of our port. So you'll notice that there are 2 holes. There are holes here on the sides and then a hole at the bottom. We want one wire to be in the bottom and one to be on the side. Your female port may look a little different, but the object is for the 2 ports to be away from each other. So again, we want to make sure that our wire or metal is not touching one place port to another. So we're going to string our black wire through the bottom of our switch port, add a bit of flux, and then let the solder cover the flux. So it will look something like this. Then we will snip our wire. So now you'll notice that there are 2 little flaps at the very bottom of the switch port. We're going to fold those flaps over kind of like they're hugging the wire. This way if someone's tugging on the wire or you drop the toy, it's not going to pull the solder and the wire apart. So once you've folded those ends of the port together, you're going to string the black cover through the wire and twist or pop it shut. Now I'm going to demo the steps that we've gone through. If you have any additional questions about this video or any of the videos within this module, please email me at tasc@ucphuntsville.org. Thank you. So step 1 of making a female switch port is setting up your station and getting all your tools together. So first off, there's nothing in my station. I'm not going to burn anything, and I have made a safe little area to do so. I have my wire cutters, my wire strippers, my scissors. I have my female switch port, which I'm going to be adapting. I have my stand, my soldering iron, my flux, and my solder. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare our wire. So you can see here I have my black and red wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip the very end of the wire using my wire strippers. You'll notice that there's little holes here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the wire, and this might take some trial and error to see what hole fits best, but I'm going to fit my wire strippers over the wire like that and then pull. Now you'll notice I have my black and red wire, and then I have a couple of wires. You'll see if I kind of fray it out. There's a couple metal wires in each plastic tube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist the wires together that belong together just so they're in a nice little tight coil. So now you have something that looks like this. You have the two separate wires that aren't touching each other, and their wires are twisted together. So step one is we are going to first just separate the wires a little bit. So all I've done is used my scissors to cut the separation between the red and the black wire so that we can now peel it just a little bit. And we are going to just dip our wires in the flux. So now you'll notice I have the gooey flux all over the wires. I'm going to clip it right here. And I have my soldering iron. And then I'm just going to quickly cover my wires in the silver solder. Place it back in its stand. And now you'll see that instead of being, you might need to wipe the flux off a little bit. Instead of being copper, my wires have now turned silver from the solder. So that is step one of making a port, and you want to make sure you do that on both ends. So I already went ahead and did the two wires at the top. So I have both sides have silver and are just a little bit separated. So now we have our female switch port, and what we're going to do is just unscrew. This is the plastic cover, so you can see there's nothing in it, it's just a piece of plastic. And then this is the actual port. So as I had shown in my drawings, it's a little hard to see with this camera, but there are two holes. So there's one at the bottom there, and then there's two on the side. You can see it right there. So what we want to do is place one wire in each of those holes. I know that there's two holes on the side, but we're just going to count both of those holes as one. So step one, let's work with the side hole. So for the purpose of this, I'm going to use my red wire, and I'm just going to poke it through one of the side holes. So now you can see that the wire is through that first hole. I just poked it through, and I wanted to poke it through as much as possible. So make the plastic touch one side and then the metal on the other. So now I'm going to clamp. And what I usually use is I just use a pin needle like that you use on a bulletin board, and I scoop a little bit of flux out, and then I dab it on the end of the wire. So now you can see I have a little flux bubble that covers the hole. So now I'm going to take my soldering iron, my solder, heat it up, and then I'm just going to ever so slightly touch the flux, and it will create a little solder bubble. So now this is what my switch port looks like. And the good thing about solder is that it does cool very quickly, so you don't have to worry about burning yourself. So now you can see my wire has gone through that first hole, and now there is a little bubble of solder to hold it in place. So now if I'm gonna pull on the wire, it won't come out. So let's trim that wire. So now it just looks like a little silver bubble. Now we're going to do the other wire. So we have one red wire at the top, and remember to keep in mind, make sure that the wire is not touching any other part of the port. So we're only touching that one hole. Now let's add our black wire through the bottom there. So you can see I have the red wire going to the side hole and the black wire going through the bottom. So let's put it back in our clamp. Get our little pin, rub some flux over the hole. Remember, wherever you put flux, the solder is going to go. So heat up some solder, touch our flux, and voila. So now we have a little solder bubble here at the bottom and at the side. So what I'm going to do is trim the wire because we only need it just to touch a little bit. So there we go. So this is our final product so far. You can see that we have the red wire going up through one of the top holes in our little tiny solder bubble, and then we have the black wire going through the bottom with our little tiny soldering bubble. So now you'll notice that there's flaps on either end, and what we're going to do is just push those flaps together. So this is just going to hold the wire in place. So you can see it's just hugging it tightly so that the wires aren't going to come apart. Now if I pull on the string, it's not going to detach from our switch port. So now that we have our port finished, we are going to string our port back through the plastic covering. So it's going to look, if I can get it without being caught on anything, there we go. So just stringing it through, and it should fit nicely in that black case, and then I'm just going to screw it back on. So now our finished product, we have our female port and our wires, and they're in there tightly.